Hello and welcome, I'm Oles Garjuk and you're watching Head to Head with UATV. Ukraine has climbed 7 places in the World Bank's 2020 Doing Business rating. It now holds 64th place out of 190 economies. So what positions has the Ukrainian business improved at, and how will the rating affect Ukraine's investment attractiveness? To discuss this, we welcome to our studio today Volodymyr Dubrovskiy, Senior Economist of the Center for Social and Economic Research in Ukraine. Hello and thank you for joining us.
Hi.
So, if we may put the idea behind the World Bank rating into simple words, it should sound like it became much easier to do business in Ukraine within the last year, right? Could you please tell us how big is the progress? What do these 7 places of improvement mean?
I'm afraid I would disappoint you a little bit. It means nothing, basically, because 7 places is in rating. So it means that some other countries evolved a little bit worse than Ukraine, and Ukraine just slightly improved its rating. But for the investors, if the investors are concerned, all of the countries that are below 50 in this rating are not considered seriously, actually.
So Ukraine is on 64th place.
Yes, but it is slowly approaching this 50th place, but very slowly. And also, this rating is just a very initial, very rough estimation of the business climate, because it is based on model estimation of some firms that are typical for different countries. Also, it measures only those things that are common for all countries, like, for example, cost and time needed to receive a building permit, because building permits are everywhere. But Ukraine has a lot of specific things, like infamous court system and so on, that could not be measured by the rating.
So as far as I understand, there are some key indicators that the World Bank is measuring all the time, and then they calculated based on some criteria and published this report. Could you please tell us what are these criteria, what are these key indicators, so then the audience could understand what areas will we discuss today?
The survey is made of representatives of the consulting companies and government bodies about the procedures, official procedures first of all, and official cost of different business, of different stages of doing business, like starting the business, obtaining the permits, connecting to electricity, paying taxes, recovering the insolvency, and so on. And so some of those measures are more or less adequate, like for example, with permits that I already mentioned. And here Ukraine indeed improved in the construction permits. We have quite a good position of 24 or something. But
we gained 10 points in the construction permit.
Yes.
But could you please explain the audience what has been improved then?
The procedure was improved by some new law that was adopted, but not now, a few years ago. But it took place, and eventually now it is easier. The procedure is streamlined, but the procedure for electricity connection is still cumbersome and costly. We are at this 128th place in this.
But there was slight improvement.
This was improvement because we used to be at 180th at this rating.
This is one of the last last places.
By the complexity and cost of the electricity connection. So the improvement took place, but nevertheless, unfortunately, it is still a long way ahead.
And what are the other indicators?
The other indicators...
Improvements and shortcomings.
Well, there are no much improvements. All of the indicators but one, which is related to paying taxes, slightly improved. Paying taxes slightly decreased, but it was for objective reason, because we had to introduce new procedure for the VAT. Okay, I will not explain it in much details, but the VAT compliance was a little bit complicated for the reason that we need to prevent some abuses. Unfortunately, we had lots of abuses with the VAT, so unfortunately, I'm afraid it was inevitable that we have quite cumbersome procedure of VAT paying. But still, this is not a breakthrough.
This is not a breakthrough.
Yeah, anyway.
In your opinion, what is the stagnation connected to? What is the reason that Ukraine, after launching so many reforms since 2014, hasn't been able to reach much?
First of all, the progress is not being measured by this rating, surprisingly. Because if you look at the progress of Ukraine's position in this rating, much progress was achieved under Yanukovych, because this was head of government who just put the task of improving position in the rating, not improving the business climate. The business climate
in reality
deteriorated tremendously, but the positions in rating have been improving, because they took some minor things that are not real impediments for our business, like business registration. It was not a major impediment since the beginning of 2000. But they improved it a lot, and they've got big progress in this rating. At the same time, we had racketeering, riding of the business, and so on, which are not covered by the rating. So the rating and the authors also warn it that it could not be used as a real measure. It is just a very rough, very crude assessment of some issues of the business climate. So I think that we indeed had lots of good reforms since 2014, and the most of those reforms indeed improved the business climate. If we measure the real cost of doing business, which is measured by the survey, that cost lowered in spite of inflation, in spite of devaluation, and so on. The cost of doing business lowered. Mm-hmm. But it was just not properly reflected in the rating, because this time the Ukrainian authorities did a really good job in improving the business climate, not the position in the rating.
Mm-hmm. So could you tell us how is the business climate in Ukraine in practice? If this rating cannot depict the reality, this is what I understand from your words, could you please share with us what is the reality then in Ukraine, and what still needs to be done?
Good question, because the reality is that Ukrainian business still have to negotiate with inspectors, to negotiate with tax authorities, with everybody who controls the business. Mm-hmm. And this situation was indeed improved by
the regulation reform.
Yes, ordering the inspections and so on. But still, until we change the inspectors, if a tiger once tried human meat, then it should be killed.
Because there was always will be this temptation to try once again.
Hunt people, not the animals. And the same is with inspectors that once or for many times try to squeeze out bribes from business, to exhort the business.
Because so this is judicial reform?
It is not only judicial reform. In Georgia, Kaha Medokidze did it successfully because he simultaneously changed the rules. The rules were streamlined a lot, And by the way, it was reflected in the doing business too, but not only in the doing business, it was in reality. And at the same time, he completely overhauled all of the controlling authorities. Some of them were just dissolved. Some of them, like tax inspection, tax authorities, were overhauled. And this is the only method how to make it fast and resolutive. I'm afraid that in Ukraine only a patrol police was overhauled as in Georgia, because it was done by Georgians, and Georgia was took as an example, but not...
This is a controversial question about the police, but yes, I understand that...
The road police, not only the road police, patrol police, the other police, unfortunately, was not. And the same was with other so-called siloviki, the law enforcement and so on, which are still racketeering the business as they used to, which still have a lot of tools of doing it. And what should be done? We need, first of all, to complete the tax reform. We need to make much less inspections and much less discretion of this, the inspectors, in order to minimize corruption opportunities and overhaul the tax administration. Unfortunately, the last initiative of our parliament, the laws that introduce fiscalization of sales in small business, just enhance corrupt opportunities. And I'm afraid that now we are going in the opposite direction.
But at the same time, we have a new law about the whistleblowers. And then the whistleblowers can report on corruption and they will get some kind of reward.
Yes, but in this case, it doesn't work. It can work against, for example, much embezzlement. If somebody knows that some official embezzles the state budget, he or she would work as such a whistleblower because it is in his interests. But if the business have choice, if it will be punished or it can pay some reasonable bribe, then it will never withblow on this particular inspector. It can only withblow on the norm which was used for extortion. But unfortunately, this law does not stipulate a mechanism for withdrawing on the norms, only on the people.
Well, so from your words, I understood that there has been some progress made, but it didn't have enough time to reflect onto the indicators of the World Bank rating. But at the same time, there are some economic, judicial, and other issues that are putting Ukraine still in the deadlock. But let's conclude this conversation on a hopeful note, and maybe you can tell us just briefly what needs to be done this year so Ukraine can progress better in doing business in reality and in indicators.
I think in the indicators, the most urgent thing to be done is completing reform of the electricity market so that Ukraine will improve in its position on the connecting to electricity, and this will automatically reflect it in the rating. In reality, I think it's still an important thing, but much more important thing is progress with our tax inspection, the Secret Service,
and
judiciary, which can release business from this corrupt pressure of the state.
Which can create a safe environment for the business. This is, I think, one of the most important indicators. Well, thank you so much for being a guest today in the studio, and thank you for your comments. That was Volodymyr Dubrovskiy, senior economist of the Center for Social and Economic Research in Ukraine. Thank you for watching Head to Head, and stay tuned for more with UATV.